The fog rolls thick across the Medway River on this June morning in 43 AD. Through the grey mist, a sound emerges, not the clash of swords or the thunder of hooves, but something more primal. A deep, guttural growling that seems to come from the earth itself. Roman legionnaire Marcus Valerius Corvus grips his gladius tighter, knuckles white beneath his leather gloves. He has faced Germanic berserkers, Gallic charioteers, and Parthian cavalry. But nothing has prepared him for what crashes through the British dawn. They come like demons made flesh, massive hounds, each weighing more than a full-grown man, their jaws capable of crushing bone, their eyes burning with trained fury. The Catuvelauni warriors have unleashed their most fearsome allies, and the air fills with a cacophony of barking that drowns out the screams of dying men. A beast slams into the legionnaire beside Marcus, and he watches in horror as iron-reinforced jaws clamp around his comrade's throat. The man's scream dies in a gurgle of blood. Marcus stumbles backward, his training momentarily forgotten in the face of this unprecedented terror. These are not wolves. These are not the scrawny camp dogs of Rome. These are weapons, living, breathing engines of destruction that seem unstoppable. In this moment, Marcus Valerius Corvus cannot know that he is witnessing something that will transform Roman warfare forever. He cannot know that within a generation, these same terrifying beasts will bear Roman brands, wear Roman armor, and spread fear across 3 continents in the name of the eagle. He cannot know that the very nightmare charging toward him will become Rome's secret weapon, the terror that guards its borders, breaks its enemies' spirits, and turns the tide of battles from Germania to North Africa. All he knows is the sound of panting breath, the flash of teeth, and the horrifying realization that Rome has just discovered something it must possess. To understand how dogs became Rome's most devastating psychological and physical weapon, we must first understand the men who transformed them from enemy beasts into instruments of empire. Marcus Valerius Corvus was not born a hero. The son of a modest equestrian family from Umbria, he joined the Legio II Augusta in 38 AD at the age of 19, seeking fortune and citizenship for his family. Standing at 5 feet 7 inches, average for his time, with the dark hair and olive complexion typical of central Italy, Marcus was unremarkable in almost every way. His service record from the garrison at Mogontiacum, modern-day Mainz, shows a competent but undistinguished soldier, adequate in formation fighting, middling with the pilum, exceptional only in his stubborn refusal to retreat. It is this last quality that would change history. By 43 AD, Marcus held the rank of Tesserarius in the 8th cohort, a mid-level officer responsible for passwords and watch duties. When Emperor Claudius ordered the invasion of Britannia, Marcus found himself among the 40,000 men preparing to cross the Channel into a land Romans knew only through the terrified accounts of merchants and the boastful tales of Celtic traders. The Britons have monsters, one Syrian auxiliary told Marcus the night before embarkation. Not men, but beasts that fight beside them, dogs as large as horses, trained from birth to kill Romans. Marcus had laughed then. He would not laugh again. Caratacus, king of the Catuvelauni, knew the Romans were coming months before their ships darkened the horizon. At 31 years old, this British chieftain had spent his entire adult life preparing for this moment. Tall even by Celtic standards, ancient sources suggest he stood over 6 feet, with the elaborate mustaches and lime-washed hair that Romans found so bizarre. Caratacus understood something his fellow Britons did not. Rome could not be defeated with swords alone. They have numbers, organization, and the wealth of the world, he told his war council in the hill fort of Camulodunum, modern Colchester, in the spring of 43 AD. We have the land, the fog, and the old ways. We must use weapons that make them fear the very ground of Britannia. Among these weapons were the canes pugnaces, the war dogs that Celtic tribes had bred for centuries. These massive Molossian-type hounds, ancestors of the modern mastiff, had been selectively bred for size, aggression, and loyalty to their handlers. Archaeological evidence from British sites suggests these dogs stood 30 to 34 inches at the shoulder and weighed between 150 to 180 pounds, larger than any canine the Mediterranean Romans had encountered. Dr. Jennifer Morrison, professor of ancient military history at Cambridge, explains, "The Celts had a sophisticated understanding of animal husbandry that Romans initially dismissed as barbarism. Their war dogs weren't random aggressive animals. They were the product of generations of careful breeding, training, and cultural integration into warfare. When Romans first encountered them in significant numbers during the Britannia campaign, it represented a genuine tactical shock." The third figure in our drama is Tribune Aulus Plautius Silvanus, nephew of the expedition's commander and a military innovator who saw in British war dogs something other Romans saw only as a threat. Born into one of Rome's most distinguished families in 15 AD, Aulus had served in Pannonia, Germania, and Syria, collecting tactical knowledge like other patricians collected Greek sculptures. At 28, he possessed the ruthless pragmatism that built the empire, while other officers wanted to exterminate the British war dogs as abominations. Aulus saw them as tools waiting to be wielded by the superior Roman system. "Barbarians have strong ale and decorative talks," he allegedly wrote to his uncle after the Medway battle. "We take their ale for our soldiers and their gold for our treasury. Why should we not take their dogs for our legions?" To fully appreciate the revolution Rome would engineer, we must understand that war dogs were not a British invention. They represented an ancient military tradition stretching back millennia. In 628 BC, Assyrian king Ashurbanipal deployed massive mastiffs against his enemies. We see them in palace reliefs at Nineveh, powerful beasts shown alongside armored warriors. These dogs wore spiked collars and protective armor, trained to attack enemy formations and hunt fleeing soldiers. The Assyrians understood that a charging dog created psychological chaos that no amount of training could entirely overcome. The Egyptians knew this too. Murals from the reign of Ramesses show war dogs accompanying chariot forces, and archaeological evidence from the Hyksos period suggests specialized breeding programs for military canines. The pharaohs valued certain breeds so highly that killing a war dog carried the same penalty as killing a soldier. By the time of classical Greece, war dogs had become sophisticated military assets. The Athenians employed them as camp guards and scouts. The famous Molossian dogs of Epirus, named for King Molossus, became the gold standard of ancient war canines. These massive hounds could bring down a man in armor, their bite force estimated at over 500 psi, comparable to a modern English mastiff. Alexander the Great reportedly received a Molossian named Peritus as a gift, a dog so valued that when it died, Alexander built a city in its honor. Whether true or embellished, the story reveals how elite warriors viewed exceptional war dogs as companions worthy of the same respect as human brothers in arms. The Celts, however, took canine warfare to new heights. Professor Marcus Webb of the University of Edinburgh notes, "Celtic culture integrated dogs into the very fabric of their military identity in ways Mediterranean civilizations had not. Irish and British myths are filled with warrior hounds. Cuchulainn literally means hound of Culann. This wasn't just utility, it was spiritual. A warrior with a great hound was expressing his status, his ferocity, his connection to the wild power of the land itself." Celtic war dogs served multiple roles: as guards for camps and livestock, as hunters to feed armies on the march, as psychological weapons to terrify enemies, and as actual combatants trained to break shield walls and drag down cavalry. The Gauls who sacked Rome in 390 BC likely used such dogs. The Celtiberians who fought Hannibal and later Rome itself deployed them in Spain. When Caesar conquered Gaul, his commentaries mention British and Germanic dogs, but notably downplay their effectiveness. The mark, perhaps, of a commander who found them more troublesome than he wished to admit. By 43 AD, when Claudius ordered the conquest of Britannia, Roman military doctrine had calcified around the legion system. Heavy infantry and organized units supported by auxiliary cavalry and skirmishers. It was a system that had conquered the Mediterranean world. It had no formal place for war dogs. The Britons were about to teach Rome a bloody lesson in adaptation. Dawn breaks on June 14th, 43 AD. The Roman invasion force has pushed inland from its landing sites in Kent, encountering scattered resistance. The Britons seem to melt away before the legion's advance. Standard barbarian tactics, the Roman commanders assure themselves. Aulus Plautius, overall commander of the invasion, has driven his forces forward aggressively, seeking the decisive battle that will break British resistance. He finds it at the river Medway. Caratacus has chosen his ground with care. The river is wide here, fordable but not easily so. The far bank rises in a gentle slope thick with forest, perfect terrain for ambush, terrible ground for Roman formations. Ancient sources suggest Caratacus commanded somewhere between 15,000 to 20,000 warriors, drawing from the Catuvelauni, Trinovantes, and allied tribes. Among them were the dog handlers, the Can Gaisgedai in the old tongue. Each controlled a pair of the massive canes pugnaces, held on reinforced leather leashes, armor plating protecting their chests and flanks. Marcus Valerius Corvus stands in the second rank of the 5th century, 8th cohort, Legio II Augusta. Around him, 200 heavily armored legionnaires prepare for the river crossing. The fog is oppressive, reducing visibility to perhaps 30 feet. The air smells of wet earth, river water, and the sweat of anxious men. "Maintain formation," the centurion barks. "Stay tight on the man beside you." They enter the water. It's cold, snow melt from the British highlands mixing with spring rain. The current pulls at Marcus's legs, threatening to upset his balance under the weight of armor and equipment. 40 pounds of gear, minimum. The pilum in his right hand, shield on his left arm, gladius at his side. The drill is automatic after 5 years of service. Halfway across, the sound begins. If you appreciate stories like this, tales of how ancient warriors adapted, innovated, and transformed in the crucible of combat, please subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell. We bring you forgotten chapters of military history every week, stories of courage and ingenuity that shaped our world. Your support allows us to research these deep dives into the past. Now, back to the Medway, where Marcus and his brothers are about to face something that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. The barking erupts from the British side like thunder. Not a few dogs, dozens of them, perhaps more than 100. The sound echoes off the water and through the fog, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Men in Marcus's cohort hesitate. The formation wavers. "Forward!" the centurion screams. "It's just dogs! Forward!" They emerge from the river onto muddy ground. The British line waits 50 yards ahead, a mass of painted warriors with spears and swords. Standard barbarian tactics. The legionnaires begin to dress their lines, preparing for the clash. That's when the Britons release the dogs. They come through the fog like apparitions made real. Marcus sees the first one clearly. A massive brindled beast with armor plating across its chest, spike-studded collar around its throat. It moves with horrifying speed for something so large, closing the distance in seconds. The dog hits the Roman line 15 feet to Marcus's left. The impact is devastating. The animal weighs nearly 200 pounds and hits the formation at a full sprint. A legionnaire goes down, his shield torn from his grip. The dog is on him instantly, jaws clamping on his sword arm. The sound of breaking bone cuts through the battle noise. More dogs smash into the line. The Romans try to respond with training, gladius thrusts, shield bashes, but the formations are disrupted. A man facing a sword knows where his enemy will strike. A dog fights with no pattern, leaping at throats, crushing legs, attacking from unexpected angles. Marcus's training takes over. A dog lunges at him and he brings his shield up, feeling the massive impact as the beast's weight hits the scutum. He thrusts blindly with his gladius, feels the resistance of meat, pulls back. The dog yelps but doesn't fall. It circles, blood matting its flank, looking for an opening. Another legionnaire, young Titus from Ravenna, tries to run. The dog takes him from behind, jaws closing on the back of his neck. Titus falls face first into the mud and doesn't rise. "Testudo!" someone screams. "Form testudo!" It's the right call. The legionnaires who can still move lock their shields into the famous Roman tortoise formation, presenting a wall of wood and metal to the dogs. The beasts crash against it but cannot penetrate. Some try to leap over, but the shields extend overhead. The Romans hold, but they're pinned. The dogs keep them locked in defensive formation while the British warriors advance with spears, probing for gaps. Men die in inches, stabbed through openings in the shield wall, dragged down when they stumble. Marcus is now in the front rank. The men ahead of him are dead or wounded. Through the shield gap, he sees a British handler controlling 3 dogs with hand signals, directing them like a shepherd with exceptionally lethal sheep. The man wears no armor, just blue woad paint and bronze torques. He's grinning. The Battle of the Medway lasted 2 days. The Romans eventually prevailed. They always prevailed, but the cost was severe. Ancient sources are contradictory on casualties, but modern historians estimate the Legio II Augusta alone suffered between 800 to 200 casualties killed and wounded. For a legion of approximately 5,000 men, this represented a devastating blow. The dog attacks accounted for a disproportionate amount of the psychological trauma. Legionnaires who had stood firm against Gallic charges and Germanic ambushes broke ranks when the dogs hit them, wrote the 2nd century historian Aelius Marcellus, whose account draws from earlier sources. It was not cowardice, but the shock of facing an enemy that followed no rules of warfare, that could not be intimidated by Roman steel or Roman discipline. Marcus survived the Medway. Of his original century of 80 men, 43 answered the muster the morning after the battle ended. He had a deep scar on his left forearm, where a dog's teeth had found the gap between his armor and glove. He would carry that scar, and the nightmares, for the rest of his life. But he had also noticed something crucial, something that would bring him to the attention of Tribune Aulus Plautius Silvanus. The dogs, fierce as they were, obeyed their handlers absolutely. They were trained, controlled, not random chaos, but directed violence, and anything that could be trained by Britons could be trained by Romans, only better. The conquest of Britannia continued through the summer and autumn of 43 AD. Emperor Claudius himself arrived in August with reinforcements and elephants, beasts calculated to awe the Britons as their dogs had awed the Romans. Camulodunum fell. Caraticus retreated westward, beginning the guerrilla campaign that would occupy Rome for another 8 years. But in the minds of certain Roman officers, a question festered. How do we turn this weapon against our enemies? Tribune Aulus Plautius Silvanus established his headquarters in the captured British settlement of Durovernum, modern Canterbury, in September 43 AD. Among his first orders was unusual. Capture British war dogs alive. Bring in their handlers as prisoners. Offer them incentives to cooperate. This was not standard Roman procedure. Captured military assets, horses, weapons, armor, were inventoried and redistributed. Animals were generally slaughtered for meat or sold. But Aulus saw something others missed. Dr. Patricia Chen, director of ancient warfare studies at Oxford, explains, the Romans were master adapters. They took Greek phalanx tactics and improved them. They absorbed Celtic chainmail and Hispanic gladius designs. The incorporation of British war dogs into Roman military practice follows this pattern, but it represents something more. a willingness to adopt not just technology but an entire cultural approach to warfare that was fundamentally foreign to Mediterranean military thinking. Marcus Valerius Corvus was assigned to Aulus's staff in October 43 AD. The Tribune had noticed his report about British dog handling and summoned the Tesserarius to headquarters. "You wrote that the handlers controlled the animals with whistles and hand signals," Aulus said, dispensing with formalities. "How many dogs did you observe responding to a single handler?" 2 to 3, sir," Marcus replied. "Sometimes more, but less effectively." "And when the handler died?" Marcus thought back to the chaos of the Medway. The dogs became confused. Some continued attacking, but without coordination. Some fled. One I saw stood over its handler's body and wouldn't leave even when we approached. Aulus nodded slowly. Loyalty. The barbarians train loyalty into these beasts? Could we? Sir, could we train them to be loyal to Rome, to our handlers? Could we breed them to be even more effective? Marcus hesitated. The idea seemed almost blasphemous, adopting the weapons of barbarians as if Roman methods were insufficient. But he remembered the terror at the Medway, and he thought about what such terror could accomplish in Roman hands. "I don't know, sir, but I think we should try." The first Roman war dog training program began in November 43 AD at the garrison outside Durovernum. Aulus assigned Marcus to lead it, a Tesserarius with no experience in animal handling, assisted by 2 captured British dog trainers who accepted Roman silver in exchange for their expertise. The Britons were wary at first. The older of the 2, a man named Cunorix, Hound King in the Celtic tongue, spoke broken Latin. He watched the Romans with eyes full of suspicion and grief. The younger, Valaunus, perhaps 18 years old, seemed more pragmatic. "Dogs know loyalty, not nations," Valaunus told Marcus through a translator. "They serve the pack. Make yourself pack. They serve you." The initial group consisted of 12 captured war dogs in various conditions. 3 were severely wounded and had to be put down. 2 others were old, past their prime fighting years. That left 7 animals to work with. 3 males, 4 females. The Romans knew nothing. Marcus had owned a small scent hound as a boy, a pet that slept by the fire and occasionally caught rabbits. These animals were a different species entirely, or so it seemed. The largest male, which the Britons called Cuno Marcus, Hound Rider, weighed 190 pounds and stood 34 inches at the shoulder. His head was massive, jaws thick with muscle. When he barked, men 100 feet away could feel it in their chests. The training methods the Britons used were sophisticated, based on reward and relationship rather than just punishment. This surprised the Romans, who assumed barbarian training meant beating animals into submission. "Dog is weapon, yes, but also brother," Cunorix explained in halting Latin. "You beat weapon, weapon breaks. You honor brother, brother dies for you." The handlers fed the dogs personally, always at the same time. They exercised them, cleaned them, slept near their kennels. Gradually, the animals began to accept Roman presence. Valaunus showed Marcus how to read canine body language, the position of ears, the tension in shoulders, the meaning of different vocalizations. "This sound," Valaunus said as one of the females gave a low, rumbling growl, "means I am uncertain. This sound," he pointed to a male whose growl rose in pitch, "means I will attack. Know the difference. Wrong response to wrong sound, you die." For weeks, they made little progress. The dogs accepted food and tolerated presence, but showed no loyalty to their new handlers. Then, in late December, something changed. Marcus was working with one of the younger females, a brindle-coated animal Cunorix called Bandoga. She had been standoffish, accepting food but showing no affection. Marcus sat near her kennel during off hours, simply existing in her space, speaking softly about nothing in particular. Old campaign stories, memories of Umbria, complaints about the British weather. One evening, as cold rain hammered the garrison, Bandoga approached him and laid her massive head on his knee. Marcus, hardened by 5 years of military service and the horrors of the Medway, felt tears on his cheeks. He placed his hand on the dog's head, feeling the warmth and solidity, the raw power held in check by something as fragile as trust. "I understand," he whispered. "You've lost your pack, too." From that moment, Bandoga was his. By spring of 44 AD, Marcus and his team had achieved something remarkable. 7 dogs, now fully bonded with Roman handlers, responded to Latin commands and integrated into modified century training. They weren't pets or mascots, they were combat assets. Aulus watched a demonstration in March. Marcus and another handler, a Germanic auxiliary named Hrothgar, put the dogs through tactical exercises: attack on command, halt on command, defend a position, pursue fleeing targets, return to handler. The precision was imperfect. These were animals, not machines, but it was undeniably effective. "How many could we field within a year?" Aulus asked. Marcus had prepared for this question. "If we establish breeding programs and expand the training cadre, perhaps 30 to 40 combat-ready animals. But sir, we need more than captured British stock. We need to breed them under Roman control, raise them from birth with our handlers. Breeding programs take years." "Yes, sir, but we can acquire more adult dogs. The Britons still use them in Caratacus's army. Every skirmish, every raid, we try to capture them alive." "And handlers? You're the only Roman who can currently control these animals?" "I can train others, sir. It takes time, but it's possible. Hrothgar shows promise. So do some of the local Britons we've recruited." Aulus stood silent, calculating costs and benefits with the ruthlessness that had made him invaluable to his uncle. Finally, he nodded. "You have 6 months and whatever resources you need. Show me something that can change how we fight in this miserable island." Marcus saluted. "Yes, Tribune." The first operational deployment of Roman war dogs occurred in July 44 AD during a raid on a British hill fort in modern-day Kent. The fort, perched on commanding terrain, was held by approximately 300 warriors loyal to Caratacus. A conventional assault would cost Roman lives. Aulus wanted a demonstration of the new asset. Marcus led 6 handlers and 8 dogs, Bandoga plus 7 others trained to adequate standard. The plan was simple. Use the dogs as shock troops to break the initial British resistance, then follow with legionnaires to exploit the confusion. On the night of July 22nd, the Roman force moved into position. Marcus felt his heart hammering as he checked Bandoga's armor one final time, leather reinforced with bronze plates across the chest and flanks, a spiked collar at the throat. The dog sensed his nervousness and whined softly. "I know, girl," he whispered. "First time for both of us." The attack began at dawn. The Romans approached from downslope, intentionally avoiding the expected avenue of assault. When they were 50 yards from the wall, Marcus gave the command in Latin. "Impetus! Attack!" The dogs exploded forward. Bandoga hit the wooden palisade at full speed and somehow scrambled up and over, 180 pounds of muscle and fury launching itself over a 10-foot obstacle that should have been impossible. The other dogs followed. On the far side, chaos erupted. The Britons had fought Roman war dogs before, but these were their own tactics turned against them. The psychological impact was devastating. Shouting, screaming, the sounds of combat mixed with panicked barking and howling. Marcus went over the wall with the first wave of legionnaires. Inside was pandemonium. Bandoga had taken down a British warrior and stood over him, snarling at anyone who approached. Another dog had scattered a group, trying to form a shield wall. The Britons were brave. They always were. But the presence of war dogs had shattered their cohesion. The fort fell in under an hour, with minimal Roman casualties. Of the 8 dogs, 1 was killed. A young male took a spear through the throat, protecting his handler. 2 others suffered wounds, but survived. The British defenders lost over 100 dead, with the rest scattering into the countryside. That night, as Marcus tended to Bandoga's minor injuries, cuts and scrapes from the palisade, Tribune Aulus visited the dog kennels. "The commander wants this expanded," he said without preamble. "Every legion in Britannia is to have a dog oublié unit. You're promoted to Centurion, and you'll establish the training program." Marcus looked up, shocked. "Sir, I'm not qualified to command a century. You're qualified to command this." Aulus gestured at the dogs. "That's what matters. Rome adapts. Centurion Corvus. We took the Greek phalanx and made it Roman. We took Celtic mail and Hispanic swords and made them Roman. Now we're taking British war dogs and making them Roman. You're going to show us how." The expansion of Rome's war dog program between 44 and 52 AD represents one of the least studied but most significant tactical innovations of the early imperial period. Marcus Valerius Corvus established the first formal training facility at Caleva Atrebatum, modern Silchester, in late 44 AD. The complex included kennels for up to 50 dogs, training grounds, breeding facilities, and barracks for handlers. Records from the period, fragmentary as they are, suggest the Romans approached dog warfare with their characteristic systematization. Dr. James Morrison, professor of military innovation at King's College London, notes, "What the Romans did with war dogs mirrors what they did with every other aspect of military technology. They took an existing practice and industrialized it. The Celts had master craftsmen who individually created great war hounds. The Romans created a system that could produce them in quantity while maintaining quality. The breeding program was key. Marcus and his advisors, still including Cunorix and Velaunus, now well-paid Roman employees, selected the largest, most aggressive, and most trainable dogs for breeding. They cross-bred British stock with Molossian dogs imported from Epirus and mastiffs from Syria. The goal was size, bite force, courage, and trainability. Puppies were raised from birth around human handlers. Unlike British dogs that bonded primarily with one person, Roman war dogs were socialized to accept commands from any certified handler. This standardization was crucial. If a handler died in battle, the dog could still function with another Roman controller. The training regimen was brutal but effective. From 6 months old, puppies were accustomed to the sounds of battle, drumming, shouting, clashing metal. They were taught to attack specific targets, legs to bring down cavalry, arms to disarm opponents, throats for kills. They learned to ignore distractions, to hold positions, to respond to whistle commands audible over battlefield din. By 48 AD, 4 legions in Britannia had attached dog. Typically 40 to 60 animals distributed among the centuries. The dogs served multiple roles. Camp security. Dogs patrolled the perimeter of Roman camps, their superior senses detecting infiltrators long before human sentries. British raiders who had once struck Roman encampments with impunity now faced barking alarms and slashing fangs. Psychological warfare. The Romans discovered that parading war dogs before battle terrified enemies almost as much as the actual combat deployment. The deep barking of 60 mastiffs created a sound unlike anything else in ancient warfare. A roar of anticipated violence that broke morale before swords even clashed. Pursuit. After breaking an enemy formation, Roman dogs were released to chase and drag down fleeing warriors. This was devastating against British tactics that relied on fast retreats and regrouping. Caraticus himself reportedly narrowly escaped capture by Roman war dogs in 50 AD. Combat multipliers. In close combat, a single dog could disrupt multiple opponents, creating openings for legionnaires to exploit. The dogs didn't need to kill, simply forcing enemies to divide attention between human and canine threats was enough. The success in Britannia drew attention from across the empire. By 51 AD, dog training programs were established in Germania, Hispania, and along the Danube frontier. Each region adapted the core Roman methods to local conditions and enemy tactics. The Germanic frontier forces, facing dense forests where traditional formations struggled, used dogs as scouts and ambush breakers. In Hispania, dogs hunted bandits in the mountains. In Syria, they guarded supply convoys against desert raiders. The empire was learning what Celtic tribes had known for centuries. A well-trained war dog was worth 10 men in the right circumstances. But there was a cost. Not all innovations are unalloyed goods, and the Roman war dog program carried shadows that the triumphant military dispatches failed to mention. Marcus Valerius Corvus, now a senior centurion in his mid-30s, oversaw the program's expansion from Britannia. His letters to his sister in Umbria, fragments of which survive in a family archive discovered in the 18th century, reveal a man increasingly troubled by what he had created. "The dogs serve Rome faithfully," he wrote in 49 AD, "but sometimes I see in their eyes something that disturbs me. They kill with such efficiency, such trained ruthlessness, that I wonder if we have not created something unnatural. The Britons fought with their hounds as partners. We use ours as weapons. There is a difference, though I cannot fully articulate it." The moral dimensions of weaponizing animals troubled some Romans. Seneca the Younger, writing in the 50s AD, obliquely criticized the practice. "We claim civilization, but make beasts of creatures that might otherwise know peace. In doing so, do we not make beasts of ourselves?" More practically troubling were the incidents of handlers losing control. War dogs, trained for aggression, sometimes turned on the wrong targets. In 52 AD, a dog in the 14th Legion killed a civilian camp follower, apparently unable to distinguish between an enemy and a non-combatant in the chaos of a raid. The handler was flogged, the dog destroyed, but the incident raised questions about reliability. There was also the treatment of captives. Roman war dogs were increasingly used in executions, criminals and prisoners of war torn apart by animals as public spectacle. This practice, which would reach its horrific apex in the gladiatorial games of later centuries, began in part with the war dog program. Caratacus, captured finally in 51 AD, was paraded through Rome in chains. Among the spoils displayed were British war dogs, muzzled and caged, presented as trophies of conquest. The symbolism was deliberate. Rome had taken the weapons of its enemies and turned them into instruments of empire. Standing in the crowd that day was a young historian named Quintus Fabius, who would later write, "I saw in those caged beasts the paradox of empire. We conquered the world by becoming like those we conquered, taking their strengths and making them ours. Whether this represents our glory or our damnation, I cannot say." The British resented the Roman appropriation of their war, dogs with particular bitterness. It wasn't just military defeat, it was cultural theft. Dogs held spiritual significance in Celtic religion, associated with healing, hunting, and warfare. To see them wearing Roman armor and serving Roman handlers felt like a violation of something sacred. Boudicca's revolt in 60-61 AD, though primarily driven by Roman taxation and abuse, carried undertones of cultural rage. When her forces sacked Camulodunum and destroyed the temple of Claudius, they made a point of slaughtering every war dog in the Roman garrison, not just killing them, but mutilating the bodies in ritual fashion. "They have taken our gods, our gold, and our hounds," Boudicca allegedly declared. "They will take nothing more." The revolt was crushed, as Rome always crushed resistance, but the message resonated. The Roman war dog program, for all its tactical success, represented a kind of cultural imperialism that went beyond military conquest. Dr. Sarah Williams of Trinity College Dublin argues, "The adoption of Celtic war dogs by Rome exemplifies colonial dynamics that resonate today. The dominant power doesn't just defeat the subordinate culture, it appropriates its knowledge, its symbols, its very identity, and repurposes them for imperial use. The war dogs became Roman precisely by ceasing to be British, and in that transformation, something was lost that can never be fully recovered. Despite the moral complexities, the Roman war day program reached its zenith in the late 1st and early 2nd centuries AD. By the time of Trajan's Dacian Wars, 101-16 AD, Roman legions routinely included specialized dog units as standard components. The Dacians, fierce warriors who had long troubled Rome's Danube frontier, used their own war dogs, large, aggressive animals bred in the Carpathian Mountains. The conflict became a war of dogs as much as men. Roman and Dacian hounds clashed in the forested valleys of modern Romania, and Trajan's column in Rome depicts several scenes of war dogs in combat. Tribune Marcus Ulpius Traianus, a distant relative of the emperor, commanded a dog unit during the Second Dacian War. His account, preserved in a 3rd century military manual, describes the tactical deployment. We released the dogs at the flanks while the legions pressed the center. The Dacian line, already engaged with our heavy infantry, could not reform to face the canine assault. Their own dogs were held in reserve. A mistake. Our hounds penetrated deep into their formation before the enemy handlers could respond. The Dacians broke within the hour. By this period, Roman war dogs had evolved significantly from the captured British animals of Corvus's time. Selective breeding over 3 generations had produced animals optimized for Roman military needs, slightly smaller than the original British Mastiffs, averaging 140–160 pounds rather than 170–190, but faster, more enduring, and more responsive to training. Different breeds emerged for different purposes. Khans, pugnaces, fighting dogs, the classic war mastiffs used in direct combat. Canes venatici, hunting dogs. Faster, used for pursuit and scouting. Canes villatiki. Garrison dogs. Larger, more defensive for camp security. The professionalization of dog handling created an entirely new military specialty. Handlers, magistri canum, underwent 6-month training programs and received higher pay than standard legionnaires. The most skilled could command 5 to 8 dogs simultaneously in combat conditions. Marcus Valerius Corvus, meanwhile, had risen to command the 2nd Legion's entire dog program by 54 AD. Now 45 years old, scarred by 2 decades of warfare, he presided over more than 200 animals and 60 handlers. Bandoga, his first dog, had died of old age in 52 AD. Marcus kept her collar in his quarters for the rest of his life. In 58 AD, Marcus received an unusual assignment: train war dogs for the Praetorian Guard in Rome itself. The Emperor Nero, paranoid about assassination, wanted elite guard dogs for palace security. This meant leaving Britannia, the province he had helped conquer, where he had transformed himself from a mediocre legionnaire into the empire's foremost expert on a revolutionary weapon system. His last letter from Britannia, written to his now adult nephew, reflects on what he had built. I came to this island, a simple soldier seeking glory, and found instead a calling I never anticipated. The dogs are not mere weapons. They are living beings who trust us with their loyalty and repay us with their lives. We have made them Roman, yes, but we owe them honor in return. I have spent more than 15 years in their company, and I leave Britannia knowing that what we created here will outlive me. Whether this is a good thing, history will judge. I can only say I did what Rome required and tried to do it with honor. Marcus Valerius Corvus died in Rome in 67 AD. Killed not in battle, but in Nero's purges. His name appears on a proscription list, though the specific charge is unclear. He was 58 years old. His contribution to Roman military practice survived him by centuries. The Roman war dog reached its apex of tactical integration during the reigns of Trajan and Hadrian, 98 to 138 AD. Military records from this period, though incomplete, suggest every legion maintained at least one sentry of specialized handlers with attached dog units. The eastern campaigns against Parthia saw Roman war dogs deployed in desert conditions, adapted with lighter armor and different tactical roles. In Germania, they patrolled the limites, the frontier fortifications that marked the empire's northern edge. Along Hadrian's wall in Britannia, they guarded the gates and patrolled the military zone. Archaeological evidence supports the documentary record. Excavations at Roman forts from Scotland to Syria have uncovered specialized kennels, dog burials with military honors, including grave goods and inscriptions, and even dog armor fragments. A particularly moving find from Vindolanda on Hadrian's wall includes a wooden writing tablet reading, "Cerberus, faithful companion of the 6th century, died in service to Rome. He knew no fear." Dr. Michael Torres, specializing in zoo archaeology at the University of Manchester, notes, "The physical remains tell us these animals were valuable, honored members of military units. They received medical care. We find bones that healed from injuries, evidence of veterinary intervention. They were buried with care. This wasn't utilitarian use of disposable assets. These were valued companions." But the same forces that eventually weakened Rome itself began to undermine the war dog program. The military crisis of the 3rd century AD, 235 to 284 AD, saw constant civil wars, barbarian invasions, and economic collapse. Maintaining specialized breeding programs and training facilities became difficult when legions were constantly on the march, fighting succession wars rather than external enemies. The professionalization that had made Roman war dogs so effective also made them expensive. A fully trained war dog represented months of specialized care, feeding, and training, resources increasingly scarce as the empire fractured. By the late 3rd century, references to organized war dog units largely disappear from the historical record. Individual commanders might maintain personal dogs or small guard packs, but the systematic integration into legion structure had collapsed. The final documented use of Roman war dogs in anything resembling the classical program comes from 312 AD, when Constantine's forces used them at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. But these were ad hoc units, not the specialized sentries of earlier centuries. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD scattered the remaining military traditions. The Eastern Byzantine Empire maintained some use of war dogs, but never with the systematic approach of the earlier period. Yet the legacy endured in unexpected ways. Medieval European armies rediscovered war dogs, likely drawing on folk memories and fragmentary Roman texts. The Normans used them at Hastings in 1066. Spanish conquistadors deployed war mastiffs in the Americas, dogs whose lineage traced back through medieval Europe to Roman breeding program. The psychological warfare tactics developed by Marcus Valerius Corvus and his contemporaries echoed through centuries. Even today, military working dogs, Belgian Malinois in special operations, German shepherds in security roles, represent a direct conceptual descendant of Roman innovation. The idea that dogs can be trained, deployed, and integrated into military operations as force multipliers, that's fundamentally Roman. History remembers the emperors and the famous generals. Claudius gets credit for the conquest of Britannia, Trajan for the expansion into Dacia. But the men who actually forged the tools of empire, engineers, trainers, innovators, fade into obscurity. Marcus Valerius Corvus is almost entirely forgotten. His name appears in no major ancient source. The fragments of his letters survived by accident, preserved in a family archive that eventually made its way to a monastery. His promotion to Centurion is recorded in a fragmentary military roster discovered in the 1950s. His death in Nero's purges is a single line in Tacitus. Yet his contribution shaped Roman military practice for centuries. What Corvus did, argues Dr. Jennifer Morrison, was fundamentally change how Rome thought about warfare. Before him, Roman military doctrine was conservative, resistant to major tactical innovation. The legion system worked, so why change it? Corvus, and the officers who supported him like Aulus Plautius Silvanus, showed that Rome could incorporate radically foreign practices without losing its essential Roman character. That flexibility, that willingness to adapt, was key to Rome's longevity. The story of Roman war dogs is really the story of empire itself. The taking of others' strengths, the systematic improvement, the industrial scaling, the moral complications, and ultimately the impermanence of all human endeavors. The dogs that terrified Marcus Valerius Corvus at the Medway River in 43 AD descended from ancient breeding lines going back millennia. Within a generation, they wore Roman bronze and answered to Latin commands. Within a century, they were emblematic of Roman military might across 3 continents. Within 5 centuries, they had vanished, surviving only in archaeological fragments and historical footnotes. But every time a modern soldier works with a military dog, every time trust is built between human and canine in service of a larger mission, the ghost of Marcus Valerius Corvus is present. The methodology he helped develop, systematic training, bonding, specialized roles, treating dogs as valued assets rather than disposable tools, these endure. The story of how dogs became Rome's most terrifying war weapon is not really about dogs. It's about how empires expand not just through military might, but through cultural appropriation, taking the innovations of others and claiming them as their own. It's about the moral ambiguity of turning living beings into instruments of violence, however necessary that violence might seem. It's about how forgotten individuals, whose names barely survive in the historical record, can change the course of warfare. Marcus Valerius Corvus went to Britannia as an unremarkable soldier and became the father of systematic military sinology. He saw his comrades killed by British war dogs and transformed that trauma into innovation. He spent years of his life breeding, training, and deploying animals who trusted him completely and then sent them into horrific violence. Was he a visionary or a monster? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. Perhaps he was simply a man who did what his civilization required with all the moral complexity that entails. The Celts who first bred war dogs saw them as spiritual companions, extensions of warrior identity, sacred beings tied to the land and the gods. The Romans saw them as assets to be optimized, deployed, and expended in service of empire. Both perspectives contain truth. Both involved relationships of genuine affection and trust between humans and animals. Both resulted in dogs dying in wars they could not understand for causes they could not comprehend. We like to imagine we're more sophisticated now, that our military working dogs are treated humanely, that we honor their service. And perhaps we do, better than ancient Rome. But we still send them into danger. We still breed them for traits that make them useful to us. We still employ them as weapons while telling ourselves stories about partnership and loyalty. The Romans at least had the honesty not to pretend it was anything but what it was, the systematic application of violence in service of power. As we look back across 2 millennia to that foggy morning at the Medway River, to Marcus Valerius Corvus facing down British warhounds and seeing not just terror, but possibility, what should we take away? Perhaps this, that innovation is morally neutral. The Roman war dog program was tactically brilliant and ethically complicated. It expanded empire and caused suffering. It forged bonds of genuine affection between handlers and animals while reducing those same animals to weapons. It represented the best of Roman adaptability and the darkest aspects of Roman imperialism. Every military innovation carries this duality: the longbow, the stirrup, gunpowder, nuclear weapons. Each changed warfare, each made some more powerful and others more vulnerable. Each seemed both necessary and terrible to those who lived through its deployment. We cannot escape this tension. We can only acknowledge it, grapple with it, and try to act with honor within the constraints we face. Marcus Valerius Corvus did that, as best he could. A mediocre legionnaire who became exceptional not through battlefield heroics, but through the patient, difficult work of building something new. A man who kept his first war dog's collar until he died, even as he trained thousands more for the Empire. The fangs of empire cut both ways, outward toward enemies, but also inward toward our own humanity. Every tool we create shapes us as we shape it. Rome became more effective through its war dogs, but also perhaps more ruthless, more willing to weaponize even the bonds between species. That's the lesson the forgotten Centurion teaches us across the centuries. Innovation is transformation, and transformation changes not just tactics, but souls. The dogs are gone now. The Empire is gone. Even the names of most of the handlers and warriors are gone, erased by the erosion of time. But the question remains, as urgent now as it was on that bloody riverbank in 43 AD. When we take something beautiful, loyalty, courage, trust, and turn it into a weapon, what do we gain? And what do we lose? For Marcus Valerius Corvus, Centurion of Rome, and all the warriors, human and canine, whose names history forgot, but whose legacy endures. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please share it. History belongs to all of us, especially the parts we've forgotten. Subscribe for more forgotten chapters of our shared past. And remember, every empire was built by individuals whose names we'll never know, making choices we can barely imagine, in circumstances we can only reconstruct from fragments. What would we have done in their place? That question is why history matters.